There are new reports showing that Ubers and Lyfts are getting more expensive, yet they're still paying their drivers the same amount, if not less. Things are looking a bit dicey when it comes to ride sharing, especially when it comes to how much Uber and Lyft are charging. Uber and Lyft risks losing customers as fares jump 7.2%. Going down here, that basically there's a risk of drop off in demand if rideshare prices continue to increase beyond their current levels, because the median price of an Uber and Lyft ride in the US rose by 7.2% in 2024 to $16, according to Gridwise. They do a lot of surveys, studies, statistics, all this kind of stuff regarding ride sharing. And this is the biggest thing. More than 72% of consumers said they would stop or reduce using rideshare services if prices increased further. I do feel a bit mixed about that, if that's actually true. We will talk about that. And they did a survey of 1,000 customers. So I'm not going to lie, not the craziest sample size. I mean, if you look at it like that from a statistics perspective, but I feel like that's probably indicative of the entire population. Ubers and Lyfts have gotten crazily more expensive. I know here in LA, for example, it's been a bit ridiculous how expensive they've gotten, and it brings up questions like Waymo, which I've done a bunch of videos about on this channel, the self-driving car sometimes being cheaper. And for a lot of people, they're like, I don't care how much it costs. If I can get there, I can get there. This is why things like Uber Pool, Lyft Line, even Express Pool was so prevalent back in the day. Obviously that doesn't really exist anymore. UberX Share is kind of meh. But, it is one of those situations that things are getting way more expensive and a lot of people are being fed up, right? And as you can see here, the two companies in recent weeks provided weaker than expected gross bookings forecast when they reported quarterly results. Both firms' shares declined following the earnings announcements. And one thing I will say is, I know on this channel, I don't talk about stocks and trading and investing, but there is something to be said that when you see the shares of Uber and Lyft decreasing in value or whatever, that is a big sign when it comes to shareholders, the ride-sharing market, and especially ride-share drivers, right? They kind of made some stuff up. Uber attributed its muted guidance to macro and seasonal factors, including headwinds, the LA fires, cold winter weather, all that kind of stuff. But I don't really believe that's the case, to be honest. It's also pouring millions of dollars into a national ad campaign to push for reforms in insurance policies that it says it's been exploited by personal injury lawyers and helps make rides more expensive. This, in turn, Uber says, has curbed demand in key markets like California and New Jersey. I don't know. It basically comes down to rideshare drivers should be able to get the money they deserve while also being protected and getting the protection they deserve, which is why I always suggest make sure you have rideshare insurance. I say that in so many videos, and for good reason. It can save you if something goes wrong, because Uber and Lyft doesn't have the best insurance policies and coverages, although it does depend area to area, right? And this is another big thing. As I mentioned before, when it comes to rideshare drivers and them not getting paid the amount they should be getting paid, the rise in fares has not translated to an equivalent rise for rideshare drivers, even as they put in more hours. Gridwise found that Uber drivers' average weekly gross earnings fell 3.4% in 2024 from a year ago to $513, while weekly hours increased by 0.8%. This is something that I've noticed. I'll talk about that in a second. Say this last line, by the way. Lyft drivers, butchered that. Lyft drivers saw that number drop from 14% to $318, the report found, while weekly hours also dropped by 5.4%. And this is a big thing I've noticed, and I've talked about in some videos. There's been some articles about this. I've gotten a lot of comments on this channel about this, that a lot of rideshare drivers now are saying, it's weird, I'm driving more to make less. Plain and simple. Straight up, I'm driving more to make less. Something's not adding up. Literally, something's not adding up, right? And going down here, that the results show that driver and courier earnings combined, including tips, grew about 18% on average in Uber 2024 results. But tips can contribute to more than half of food delivery drivers' income, compared to just 10% for rideshare drivers, Gridwise's report found. And I've talked a lot about tips on this channel, that it's weird that ride-sharing is truly the only service I can think of that you should tip, but no one does. right? And every driver said the same thing, like, oh, I'll tip you in the app. And it's like, okay, yeah. Because once you leave, there's no social pressure of you not tipping. If you don't tip at a bar, they're going to give you some flack for it. If you don't tip your waitress, of course, there's a huge social stigma, and you could get attacked, or not attacked, but you're going to get, something's going to probably like happen to you. You can have someone confront you, right? When it comes to food delivery services, a lot of Uber Eats drivers, Postmates drivers, etc., won't deliver to you if you don't tip them in the beginning, right? You almost have to tip before you even get the food, or you do. And in this case, ride sharing is the only one that's almost the opposite. You tip afterwards, but there's no social pressure to. And once you leave that car, most people forget, or they know, but they just don't care, right? Kind of annoying, kind of frustrating. And in addition, going on here, that the Uber spokesperson, which is kind of annoying, says that the GridWise's findings are misleading. I'm sorry, I trust GridWise, an independent. GridWise doesn't have a dog in the race when it comes to Uber or Lyft. They're just like, hey, we're just gonna do some statistics, some surveys. We're gonna interview some people. Very independent, right? So I don't trust this. That Ryan from the Uber spokesperson called GridWise's findings misleading, saying Uber's data show that drivers in the U.S. are earning above the $30 per hour while on trip on average. However, that calculation is a big thing, does not account for the time drivers spend on the road waiting for the app to match them with the next passenger, a factor that GridWise includes when calculating drivers' total working time. And that is a big thing. I hate this kind of like money math, or almost like financial tricks, if I'd say it like that, where they're like, hey, drivers in the U.S. are earning above $30 per hour while on trip. That could be potentially true, but what they're saying is, while you're driving with somebody in your car to drop them off, if you do all this kind of math tricks and move numbers around, I bet that that's actually true, but it's not the full truth. And a lot of what Uber does sometimes, Lyft does this too, but I think Uber does this more, is they're like, oh, well, drivers are making $30 per hour while on a trip. It's almost like that annoying asterisk where it's like, okay, wait. That's not the truth. If you calculate everything, they're making way less, right? In addition, Uber could not provide comparable metrics to GridWise's weekly gross earnings and weekly hours data, as many drivers often use multiple apps at the same time. I've talked before in a lot of videos that one of the best things you can do, one of my top pro tips that I give right in the beginning, sign up for both Uber and Lyft. Use both, right? Use both. The big thing is this, though. The GridWise report does help illustrate the impacts of sky-high commercial auto insurance requirements that have made the ride-sharing industry into a target for billboard lawyers who abuse the system for huge payouts, which the rest of us end up paying for. Could be true, could be not. There may be some truth to that. I'm not saying lawyers are perfect, obviously, right? But it's a tricky thing on both sides because there are a lot of rideshare drivers who do get taken advantage of. In addition, GridWise concludes, also runs counter to Lyft's own announcement earlier this month, that it booked a record number of driver hours in 2024. When asked for a comment, Lyft spokesperson remarks from the company's fourth quarter earnings report last week, and then claimed that drivers' performance for Lyft over Uber expanded by 4 percentage points from the previous period. At the end of the day, though, and this is what it comes down to, is that Pittsburgh-based GridWise has a namesake app for rideshare drivers that can track mileage and earnings. It analyzes gig industry data for other companies. And this is one of those really annoying situations that whether you drive or not, whether you take Ubers and Lyfts or not, everyone's probably thinking the same thing when looking at this data, watching a video like this, hearing these kind of reports, and that is, wait, something isn't adding up. How are people spending? How am I spending, for example, more money to take an Uber and Lyft than ever before? And to look at the other side, drivers are getting paid less than before, and they're working more hours. Something here is not adding up. And I think one thing I kind of like about this article is they show what Uber and Lyft has said from these spokespersons and what they've said in their own announcements, while also showing what GridWise has said, being like, wait, these two things do not add up. In addition, of course, GridWise is definitely way more on the right. They have way more statistics, in my opinion. I know Uber owns the Uber app, as stupid as that is to say, right? But like, GridWise has way more statistics, and they understand the bigger picture, right? They understand the bigger picture of a lot of drivers use both apps. A lot of drivers talk about the downtime or the waiting time. Now, here in LA, there's an overlapping technique. In case you didn't know, in case you don't drive for Uber and Lyft, the way it works is typically if you're in a busy area, you can accept a ride before your current ride ends. That way you always have another ride in queue just ready to go. It makes it a lot easier to drive. You make more money that way. But in a smaller town or area, that's not the case. So that's one thing to be said. And I think when it comes to GridWise, I love the fact that they truly understand the way things really work when it comes to rideshare drivers. What it is truly like to drive for Uber and Lyft in terms of the downtime, the waiting time, using both apps, other factors that come into play, and a lot more, which is why their evidence and their, like I said, I might even call it independent research, is so well documented, and I'm going to say incredibly accurate. Like I said, they have no dog in the race. It's not like they're for Uber or against Uber. It's not like they're for Lyft or against Lyft. It's not like they're for rideshare drivers or against them per se. They're like, hey, we're just going to report the facts and these statistics as they look. And as they look, things are getting more expensive in terms of taking Ubers and Lyfts. Rideshare drivers are making less while working more hours, and this has been a big issue. Now, to comment on that one survey they did with 1,000 people, which I do think is a very small sample size, saying that about 72% of them said that they would stop taking or reduce taking Ubers and Lyfts if they continued to get more expensive. I gotta be honest, I don't believe that. For me personally, now maybe you can disagree, let me know what you think in the comments. I don't think that because I think when it comes to Uber and Lyft, love Uber, hate Uber, love Lyft, hate Lyft. Either way, they're an integral part to our society. Like imagine tomorrow what society would be like. I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but I don't think so. Imagine how crazily different our society would be if we woke up tomorrow and Uber and Lyft were gone forever. If ridesharing was gone forever. It'd be crazy. There's a lot of people who rely on ridesharing to get to and from work. If you're elderly, handicapped, or disabled, getting from place to place is a bit of an issue. Uber and Lyft has a lot of features for that, whether it's the Wave or wheelchair access option. Uber and Lyft Assist is another one. There's a lot of features to Uber and Lyft, even ignoring all those too. The most common use case of Uber and Lyft is drinking. You're going out to a bar on a Friday night or Saturday night, you're drinking, you want to be responsible, you don't want to be driving drunk, all this kind of stuff. You take an Uber and Lyft. It would be crazy if Uber and Lyft ever just went away like that. And I feel like that, love it or hate it, it's easy to say, I'm going to say in theory, but kind of, it's easy to say in theory, oh yeah, if it gets more expensive, no. But let's be honest, on a Friday night when people are drinking and they pull up Uber, I'm like, wait, this ride used to be $15, now it's $23? Well, we got to get to the bar somehow. We've been drinking. I feel like that, not saying that there's going to be a point, not saying there isn't a point where people would not pay for an Uber or Lyft. But I feel like that even if it gets more expensive, I feel like people are still going to take it. Now, yes, maybe people might find ways around it. Maybe people might start taking the metro more or their public transportation in their city. Here in LA, the public transportation sucks. But, in a place like Boston, New York, Chicago, where there's good public transportation, people might say, hey, you know what? Might as well take that. Much rather take that kind of public transportation than pay for this really expensive Uber and Lyft that's just incredibly annoying and incredibly overpriced. And this does then come into play, in my opinion, when you look at an app like Waymo, which we've done already a bunch of videos about. Waymo being a self-driving car. Only right now, at the exact time of this video, existing in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Phoenix. But that's a big thing. Waymos are getting cheaper. And for a lot of people, they're like, hey, if it's cheaper, it's cheaper. And it's tricky because I don't want to see, say, Uber and Lyft shoot themselves in the foot by overcharging customers. People are saying, hey, you know what? I'm not going to take an Uber Lyft anymore. I'll just take a Waymo instead. And now a lot of these rides and potential money goes to AI, basically, or or these conglomerates that own these self-driving car companies, as opposed to human drivers. That being said, human drivers still, and I've done so many videos on this channel about how Uber and Lyft does treat its drivers not the best and treat them very unfairly. I do think things have gotten better, but also worse. It's tough to say right now. Things always are up and down. Things are always up and down when it comes to ride sharing. I've talked about that in so many videos about all these different factors. But like I said, at the end of the day, it's really frustrating to see this kind of play out. Because if let's say ride share drivers were getting paid more, but also rides are more, I'd actually not be as mad about it. I'm like, all right, I have to pay more for this Uber and Lyft, but I get it. Back in the day, ride share drivers, it's kind of crazy, especially when I look back when I first started driving. The ride share drivers got paid more, to work less and rides were cheaper. Granted, from a business perspective, and in case you know I'm a former accountant, from a business perspective, Uber and Lyft were both pretty in the red, meaning they were losing a sugar honey iced tea load of money like every quarter. So there was a point, I will say, where it was not sustainable, that both Uber and Lyft knew as companies with their shareholders, all this kind of stuff, that it was not sustainable. Airbnb did the same thing. In case you're curious, when you take like an Airbnb versus hotel, which I feel like there's a good parallel between ride sharing and like the lodging space, is the same thing happened with Airbnb. You know, we all know that Airbnbs used to be a great resource to quickly stay somewhere, someone's house, and it was super inexpensive. And then all of a sudden now it seems like Airbnbs are way more expensive than hotel. And a lot of people now, if anything, say, hey, why book an Airbnb when a hotel is way better than Airbnb when you look at everything now? And in a similar way, not saying people are choosing taxis over ride sharing, but I think a lot of people now are getting fed up with how expensive ride sharing has gotten, right? And like I said, what happened years ago when I first started driving was not sustainable, right? Definitely not sustainable for rides to be super cheap. They were paying ride share drivers a lot. The money had to come from somewhere, typically from investors, all this kind of stuff. And that's why we're kind of here where we are now. But at the end of the day, it's so frustrating that in 2025, when you look at everything, that rideshare drivers are still not being paid that much. They're being paid less and less and less. We're working more and more and more. And for people taking the Ubers and Lyfts, you're also now spending more. I don't know. It's one of those situations where you're asking, where's this money really going? Is it just pure capitalism, which I feel like there's a part of that? Is there other things going on? I don't know, but something's got to change, because at the end of the day, this is definitely not sustainable. And if prices keep increasing, I'm not saying that people are going to stop taking Ubers and Lyfts, but they might reduce them. I think that's very, very plausible, which is going to affect a lot of the rideshare drivers out there. Not the best situation to be in.